All right, it's 12:30, so we will go ahead and get started. Welcome, my name is Sarah Sims, and I'm the manager of continuing education for the Brown School here at Washington University in St. Louis. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Open Classroom. Open Classroom is the Brown School's virtual and free professional development series. Beyond Open Classroom, we are the largest provider of continuing education units in our region. And so if you are looking to gain CEUs or deeper learning opportunities, I invite you to check out our website, brownschool.wusl.edu/professional-development. You can also scan that QR code there on your screen or go to the link that I dropped in the chat to learn more about our programs. We offer workshops year-round on nearly a weekly basis, so we would love to have you in any of those. So before we get started, I have just some very brief housekeeping items. First, this is it's a Zoom webinar, which just means that we can't see or hear you, but the chat is open or should be open to everyone. And I do see folks chatting. You can either chat with everybody in attendees and panelists, or you can choose to send your chat just to the hosts. That's us. And feel free to say hello, but also we hope that you will drop any questions that you have. We'll be doing questions likely at the end, and we would love to have questions from all of you that our presenters can answer. The other reminder is just that we do record our programs and then we post them to our YouTube page, usually 1 or 2 days after the program ends. So if you want to send this presentation to a colleague, we would love to have you do that. And links to where you can find those are going to be dropped in the chat in just a moment. So now I am going, sorry about that. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Sarah Lucan, who's the Assistant Director for Admissions and Recruitment here at the Brown School. She's going to introduce our 2 presenters and today's program. Sarah?
Great, thanks, Sarah. Like Sarah Sims mentioned, my name is Sarah Lucan. I use she, her pronouns, and I am an Associate Director of Admissions and Recruitment for the Brown School here at Washington University in St. Louis. I want to give a special welcome to prospective Brown School students. We're very glad you're here, and I am thrilled to welcome everyone to our first Open Classroom of our Curriculum Showcase series. And just a special thanks to Sarah and the Brown School Professional Development Team for partnering with admissions to bring this great series to our prospective students and to the community. We hope what you gain from this Open Classroom is a little more knowledge about the topic being discussed, and then for prospective students, a sense of what you can expect in the classroom with the renowned faculty members who are being featured in this series. Today's session, which is titled "A Place for Every Advocate, Hunger in the United States," is designed especially to give you a peek into the type of issues that are addressed by our policy-related curriculum, which is offered to students across our graduate programs in social work, public health, and social policy. I am pleased to introduce today's speakers, Anna Shabsin and Dan Ferris. A 2-time recipient of the Brown School's Excellence in Teaching Award, Professor Anna Goldfarb Shabsin serves as the Assistant Dean for the Social Policy Program and is the Chair of the Policy Specialization in the MSW program. Anna holds a JD from Washington University's School of Law, and so very naturally, she also oversees the university's dual degrees with the JD MSW and JD MSP programs, and serves as a faculty advisor for both MSW students and joint JD MSW and JD MSP students. And Dan Ferris is an assistant professor of practice at the Brown School. As the inaugural dean for policy initiatives at the Brown School, Dan expanded the Master of Social Policy dual degree program and continues to support student learning opportunities such as the Graduate Policy Scholars Program and the Cigna Foundation Fellowship. He is also the Associate Director of Training and Education at the Brown School's Social Policy Institute. Dan holds a master's in public administration from NYU and a PhD in public and social policy from St. Louis University. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleagues, Dan and Anna, to get us started with today's session.
Great. Thank you so very much, Sarah, for the warm introduction, and welcome everyone. It's been so great to see folks saying hello in the chat, some familiar names, some new names to be sure. Everyone is so very welcomed. So today, Anna and I have the pleasure to come together to co-present A Place for Every Advocate, Hunger in the United States, bringing what we love to do in our Brown School classes here to open classroom and a broader audience. So our session today is going to bring together two key points. First, families should have the food and nutrition needed to support healthy lives. And second, there is a place for everyone, underscored everyone, in policy to help make that happen. So a couple of just framing thoughts as we get warmed up. My work in food policy is really geared around practice, research, and policy intersections. So as we talk and think about complex, or in the policy space, what might be called wicked problems and social issues, solutions demand coordinated responses that connect research, practice, and policy. So when we think about these traditionally siloed and isolated areas, work is as much about the areas themselves as how we can really meaningfully intersect and couple them together, largely in shared interest for leveraging to support solutions to produce impactful change. And policy doesn't change on its own. The folks on the left, policy decision makers, specifically here a recent incoming new class of representatives in the US House, need the folks on the right, whatever their advocacy work might look like, to understand and advance policy change that spans countless programs, systems, and priorities. So with that, I will turn things over to Anna to talk a bit about a policy ecosystem as we set the stage for our time today.
Thank you so much, Dan. If you could flip the slide. Dan's in charge of slides today, so he's going to do a great job. So I think Dan and I both approach policy work in the same way. And so we'll give you, as Dan said, an ecosystem, an idea of a complex set of organisms working together to get to a place where they can thrive and grow. And they're also faced with outside influences that could be rain, it could be drought, it could be sunshine, and they have to grow and respond and work together in order to survive. Dan, can you change the slide? Awesome. And so we see how that works, where it's just, we talk about ecosystems a lot of times in biology. Would you mind changing, please? Or flip the slide? Awesome. Similarly, in our government, in our politics, in our policy work, that is an ecosystem as well. And I think one of the tricky things that you hear a lot of times is, hey, I don't like this policy. It's making it hard for my family. In this case, it's making it hard for people to get the nutrition that they need in order to survive and thrive. We need a bill and we need to amend a law. And that's fine. That's working with the legislative branch. Could you turn the slide, please? However, this is a vast ecosystem involving significantly more than the legislative branch. And I know these words are small on the left, but just to tell you, it involves so much more. There is legislation, of course, which is what we're talking about, but also working with the agencies, a lot of which you see pictured in this picture of Washington, D.C., making either rules or regulations or getting guidance or evaluating what they're doing or just partnering with them. It involves sometimes bringing litigation. You can't see the Supreme Court building, but it's right behind the Capitol. Sometimes we plan cases because we think the court system will give us a better solution. In all of those three branches of government, we also need a whole host of outside skills. We need lobbyists. We need people who do advocacy. We need policy economists. We need people who can negotiate and do good strategy. And all of that works together. Dan, could you flip the slide? Thanks. As Dan said before, there's a place for everyone. And this is a photo of one of my classes. We were if you're not from Missouri, we were in the Missouri Capitol building in Jefferson City. The woman in the middle in the striped shirt is former Representative Stacey Newman. And I teach state level lobbying. We go down to the Capitol and lobby. Everyone in this picture, though, brought their own unbelievable set of skills and passions and things that interest them to this work, and they were able to provide vast strategies for Missouri agencies. So if you think to yourself, I don't know if I could do policy work because, I don't know, I'm just, I don't like reading law, please come. We need all of you. And in fact, I'm sure we could all agree that if you love social media, please do social media for some of these politicians because it's pretty ridiculous. Oh, Eric, yay. I just saw you popped up in the chat. Eric is not in this picture, but yes, was a wonderful member of last year's class. And his organization is partnering with us this year, which I'm super excited about. Dan, would you flip the page, the slide? It's not page. Just to show you how broad, this is a tiny, tiny, tiny slice of some of our alums who are doing amazing policy work, but it's all across the board. Some are in the executive branch, some are in the legislative branch. We have people at federal, local, and state levels. We have people working in agencies. We have people getting PhDs so they can do more evaluation and influence policy through research. And we have people who have had political aspirations or held political offices like Scott Millar, who works in programming, but has served in local government and wants to do so again. So all of these amazing alums, just to show you, if you think this is, I can't do this, yes, you can. And Dan and I would always be happy to talk to you about how you get involved, okay? And this is just, well, the quotation is usually attributed to Aristotle, but there's some controversy around that. The sentiment is still the same, right? And this is a wonderful way to guide our work. And then if you would flip the slide, Dan. And then just showing you, I mean, we're doing this from a school of social work and social policy, and there's always an inherent connection. The roots of social work actually are in social policy, but just showing you that all of the social justice work we do, and this is one of our amazing alums who's the associate executive director at an animal welfare organization that does state level work. And here she is with our governor after getting an amazing, amazing pet protection law passed. So just showing you, please, please, please don't think you can't do it. Or if you're doing it, boldly invite other people into work, because we are only strong doing this work if we have all the skills represented in our ecosystem to thrive and make social justice a centerpiece of the next round of policy that comes out. So I'm going to turn it over to Dan to talk a little bit about his work, and then I'll pop back in later on.
Thanks again, Anna. So as we transition from this great success story of moving legislation through in Missouri, I'm sure what the process looked like was how the policy process is traditionally presented, that experience for Aislinn and colleagues. So traditionally, a troubling social condition or problem comes to light and is documented. Public officials assess this problem and its causes to respond as efficiently as possible, and through such means as new legislative enactments or regulation. Attention to the problem continues until the distressing concern is alleviated. Rinse, wash, and repeat. So this is how policy change happens, right? It suggests rationality and neutrality in decision-making. We know that reality is much, much, much more complex, political, and driven by a wide range of interests. Especially as the process looks more complex and less linear, there are important places for advocacy and advocates at every stage. So today we're coming to talk about a place at every hunger and a place for advocacy. And so just to get a little bit of term definition out of the way. So typically when we're talking, or in my work, when I'm talking about access to food, we're using the construct of food insecurity. So food insecurity, a household is considered food insecure when members have had difficulty accessing sufficient food in the previous 12 months due to a lack of resources. The measures for it are utilized in a variety of different contexts and for different purposes. But basically at its core, food insecurity is an economic condition. And though while focused on an economic condition and a lack of resources, it's deeply linked and tied to adverse health, developmental, and educational outcomes. So as we look at prevalence of food insecurity in 2020, 10.5% of US households were food insecure at some point during the year, including 13.6% of households with children. This increased with the latest data from 2022, showing 12.8% of households food insecure. This is 44.2 million people estimated, including over 7 million children. Missouri also, in 2020, 11.5% of all households were food insecure, and over 200,000 children directly affected. This problem isn't uniquely of Missouri or the United States and looks very different in different geographic contexts, but I think it's critical to also place what's happening in the United States in a more broader global context, as 1 in 3 people globally, almost 2.5 billion people, did not have access to adequate food. It's important to note that the overall rates here don't tell the whole story, and far from it. So while food insecurity exists in every county in the United States, food insecurity disparities and inequities are immense. Geographically, here in Missouri, nearly 1 in 4 St. Louis City households are food insecure. Disproportionately high rates are seen geographically in the Boot Heel and rural areas, and geography isn't all we'll come to talk about today. Going a bit deeper, over the past 20 years, food insecurity remains a pressing issue for health and well-being, with highest rates measured during and following the Great Recession. Data from the US Census Bureau, pictured here, show that Black, Hispanic, and households with children experience significantly higher rates of food insecurity. Additional research has found that American Indian Alaska Native households, single female-headed households, households with at least 1 non-citizen member, individuals with disabilities also experience disproportionately high rates of food insecurity. So reinforcing food security as an economic issue, an economic justice issue, disparities among these groups extend beyond access to food. They intersect as a social determinant of health with unemployment, median income, home ownership, poverty, all also intersecting with systemic racism in the United States. So this food insecurity measure has been standard practice for 25 years, give or take. But the experience of food insecurity obviously goes back much further. So folks have already done a great job in the chat introducing themselves. And so if you're still at your keyboards, here's another opportunity. Beyond food insecurity or food security, what other terms might describe families having inadequate food to eat? We'll give folks just a minute to think about that one. What other terms other than food security might describe families having adequate or inadequate food to eat? I know these are going to start coming in fast and furious, so I'll do my best. Financial stress, food desert, food apartheid, hunger, nutrition insecurity. It's like people can see ahead on my slides or something. This is great. SNAP eligible. We'll definitely be talking about SNAP today and the Farm Bill with Anna's piece. Food apartheid. All right. Well, not to leave folks in suspense, how we intentionally talk about food matters, both for purposes of research, as the concepts can be similar, but also very much distinct, and also in how we position and frame for policy campaigns. So proving that I know how to animate in PowerPoint, mission accomplished. Food injustice, food desert, food inequity, malnourishment, hunger, nutrition insecurity, food apartheid, and many, many, many more. For purposes of today, the connected research and policy practice that I'll be talking most about most commonly measures and references food security. We know that food insecurity is a signal of hunger, experienced inequitably, more commonly by people in food deserts, and resulting from an unjust food system grounded in centuries of systematic oppression. We also know that movements for food sovereignty are challenging the status quo and advancing more transformational solutions for how we think and talk about food as a basic right. So connecting us back to policy practice, we can think about framing as an advocacy focus. Before we even get into any research findings, let's talk about at the very beginning how we frame and disseminate our work for impact. So framing offers policy advocates a way to work systematically through the challenges that are likely to confront the introduction of new legislation or social policies. Going back to the policy process, that kind of linear looking circle with a lot of arrows going through different stages, you know, when we think about working through systematically in a non-linear platform, the way and opportunity that we frame the issues and the specific points that we're looking to advance in relation to the problems that we care so deeply about couldn't be more important. Reframing changes the lens through which a person can think about an issue so that different interpretations and outcomes become visible to them. This might look familiar. As a quick example, the food pyramid served a specific purpose for a number of years. whether successfully or not is another conversation for another webinar on another day, but served a specific purpose in presenting a healthy diet and one element of a food and nutrition ecosystem and space. That same pyramid idea, with some slight modifications, of course, can redirect attention to here, the labor issues at the foundation or core of that same healthy diet visual. Or, for example, the food pyramid has been creatively modified to challenge narrow, more Western presentations of diet nutrition in a broad national context of incredible diversity of food cultures. So back to food insecurity in the US. So when we think about this ecosystem of US food security and the policies and program innovations that are attempting to make headway in addressing it, we can point to federal nutrition assistance programs, and I'll also point to food as medicine in the work that I'm involved with here in St. Louis. So for the federal nutrition assistance programs, we're looking at 16 federal programs, largely through the US Department of Agriculture. We're talking about over $180 billion across these in fiscal year 2022. And 1 in 4 individuals in the US participate in at least one each year, or 80 million people. So not to play acronym soup here, but some of the acronyms that we'll be talking about today and that consist the Federal Nutrition Assistance Programs: SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program; WIC, the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, and the National School Lunch and School Breakfast Programs. Over half of food insecure households in the United States participate in at least one of the 3 largest programs. And so there's a really interesting dynamic and relationship there for us to consider as we move forward. In addition to the major programs, the largest with the greatest levels of participation and reach, these are joined by Child and Adult Care Food Program, Summer Food Service Program, Farmers Market Nutrition Programs, and more. So adjacent to the federal nutrition assistance programs, food as medicine has gained significant momentum with pretty incredible rapid investment from government, philanthropy, and the for-profit sectors, building from decades of critical services such as Meals on Wheels and medically tailored meals to further incorporate this approach into health and healthcare policy and systems. So I'll talk briefly about some of the work that I've been privileged to be a part of at the Brown School and in St. Louis with community partners and the Social Policy Institute, and then hand it back to Anna in just a little bit for a very timely national policy and practice application with the Farm Bill and SNAP. So we'll work slightly in reverse, starting with food as medicine here. But so FreshRx, Nourishing Healthy Starts, is a program of Operation Food Search, which I've been involved with since going back all the way to 2018 at this point. It's been a pretty incredible journey. So colleagues at Operation Food Search and former colleagues at Operation Food Search, some of whom are here today, welcome, hello. There's a pretty critical question here about a perinatal food insecurity intervention in St. Louis. And I'm looking to advance this novel idea that providing access, ensuring access to healthy, nutritious food, and then more holistically, other supports around access to mental health, community supports, and nutrition education and counseling and beyond, perhaps might have something resembling a meaningful impact in improving birth and maternal health outcomes. So we know that in St. Louis overall, and particularly for Black women, have higher infant mortality rates. We know that there are incredibly high healthcare costs related to birth outcomes, with NICU stays having just astronomical costs for the healthcare system and families, and then also just that it's in general a pretty crucial health period for development and for supporting health. And so when we think about the need to address and improve birth outcomes, healthcare costs, and overall development, a food as medicine intervention is a really interesting way and a really impactful way of doing so. So current policy, the federal nutrition assistance programs that we mentioned before do an incredible amount to help to support nutrition and access to food for millions of individuals and families in the United States. But clearly, current policy hasn't done enough. So enter FreshRx, and so the program itself providing regular food deliveries to individuals both during pregnancy and postpartum, And preliminary results from a program pilot suggested increased food security, decreased maternal anxiety and depression, and improved birth outcomes, improved birth weight, gestational age, and days in the NICU. This matters incredibly for the families, communities, and health system more broadly. And with the healthcare system and food as medicine, the opportunity is pretty immense. We know healthcare spending in the US is $4.5 trillion annually, almost 1/5 of the United States GDP. So food as medicine is a quickly emerging approach of connecting food assistance supports with healthcare and healthcare policy, with a place for everyone working cross-sector in advancing. We'll look a little bit later into the life cycle, turning from food as medicine, perinatal food as medicine program to school meals participation, and a recent analysis published by the Social Policy Institute in the journal Nutrients. So school meals have an expansive reach and impact on child nutrition and meal access, serving 30 million children lunch and 15 million children breakfast in the United States every day. Increased school meal participation has an impact on food security, academic and behavioral outcomes, and health. So Missouri schools alone serve over 80 million free and reduced price meals, not all meals, free and reduced price school meals in a school year. And Missouri ranks 10th nationally in breakfast participation. Despite the benefits of school meals, a substantial number of eligible students do not participate in free and reduced price meals. In Missouri, for example, more than half of the potential free and reduced price breakfasts are not served. So schools, in response, have adopted various policy and program mechanisms to serve more free and reduced price meals. So how do schools increase participation? So breakfast after the bell programs like breakfast in the classroom, second chance, and grab and go carts improve access compared to traditional cafeteria models, typically implemented at a school level. And more than 1,000 Missouri schools use at least one breakfast after the bell approach. For the community eligibility provision, the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act of 2010, pictured here at the bill signing, the community eligibility provision allows schools with higher percentages of free and reduced price meal eligible students to provide universal free school meals and receive increased reimbursement rates from all students. It's been found to ease administrative burden, reduce stigma, and increase eligibility. This dynamic also, I think, really demonstrates today's theme of a place for everyone in policy. From advocate who helped to champion to make these things possible to food service directors, making sure that the policy translation, or the translation of policy into practice and back again, is critical for food access for students and beyond. A little bit more about that previous analysis that I mentioned. So utilizing multiple years of Missouri school meal data, we found increases on participation in school meals by schools that were utilizing the community eligibility provision, and particularly breakfast after the bell. And our descriptive analysis found that CEP and breakfast after the bell participating schools had a 14 percentage point higher participation rate. So a few notes on our methods. I mentioned we used 5 years of Missouri DESE, Department of Elementary and Secondary Education data. We conducted descriptive analysis and some preliminary mapping, which showed notable clustering in adoption around the state over the study time period. From there, we moved on to implementing a conditional difference in differences model. The mathematical representation is included here as a reference. We did matching of schools in terms of their CEP eligibility, geography, school type, grade level, and then propensity scores were used to select schools in our model with similar enrollment and demographics. Most importantly, of all the details I just briefly covered, can you guess the number of times this formula has shown up on a policymaker-facing brief or fact sheet? In addition to this being really interesting for a small number of people and really important science contributions to the field, what we know when we're talking about a place for everyone, there's a significant place for new science and evidence related to school meals and federal nutrition assistance programs. But as someone who's committed to advancing the research in the area, knowing what's going to resonate and what's most critical and of interest to target audiences, here being policymakers in Missouri or in the United States Congress, knowing how to frame the issue, what to include and how to reference it is incredibly critical. To bolster that point, I like to point to Jenny Owen, who has this really phenomenal and fascinating career. Was the director of strategic partnerships for the governor in North Carolina, and also a faculty appointment and strategic engagement at Duke University. But Jenny says receiving information is not a problem. It's not a lack of quantity of research or access to research, but getting what we need, when we need it, and the format we can best use it at the right time and a way that fits with what we're trying to do. So there's a lot to unpack there. And in response, I like to juxtapose the mathematical representation of a conditional difference and differences model with how the research has turned into action with different dissemination strategies. So sharing across the work, food as medicine, school meals, and a WIC project I'll briefly mention through op-eds, through policy briefs, through national convenings, through an incredible annual report on Missouri school breakfast led by Operation Food Search, a website on school meal participation that schools were able to log on and in real time see where they stood in a kind of a report card approach and strategy. And so I'm thrilled, of course, that the studies and research have gone through peer reviewed process. However, publishing in academic journals is not the end goal in and of itself when we talk about the intersections and jigsaw puzzle pieces of policy, practice, and research. A couple of brief words on WIC and the WIC Innovation Project, also in partnership with Operation Food Search in St. Louis. So this is focused on telling the story of WIC experiences for Missourians and utilizing mixed methods research. So it's a two-phase initiative that began with a survey, over 3,000 respondents, and interviews examining participant experience and barriers in the WIC program. And why does this matter? Well, as we see here, people who experienced greater barriers listed also had higher rates of food insecurity among people participating in the WIC program. Now, we're examining how efforts within the WIC program, specifically with retailers and participant engagement with the WIC Shopper app, can help to address these very barriers and opportunities identified. I briefly mentioned this again, just to emphasize this point, a role for everyone. And here, I think we can consider how cross-sector partnership between community-based organization, researchers, government, and retailers can increase participation in programs such as WIC to increase access to nutritious food. I think I might have seen this flowing in the chat briefly out of the corner of my eye, but one timely note on WIC and federal policy, Senate and House appropriation bills, for folks who are following, does not fully fund the program, and the current continuing resolution that funds WIC expires in 10 days on January 19th. Again, a role for everyone. The Center on Budget and Policy Priorities has identified WIC facing $1 billion shortfall and 2 million program participants, young children, pregnant and postpartum adults being cut from the program. FRAC, the Food Research and Action Center, has organized January 10th as WIC National Day of Action. And countless others are working locally to raise awareness, share impactful stories, and elevate the stories of the families who will be impacted. So WIC isn't the only major food and nutrition assistance program on the policy agenda in 2024 by any means. And with that, I will turn things back over to Anna to talk a little bit about, drum roll please.
Thank you, Dan, so much. I love hearing Dan talk about his work, which there is zero chance I could do. And my work couldn't be done without Dan's work, and Dan's work can't be done without mine. And so it really is, I think, just demonstrating how we both care so much about hunger and about people receiving appropriate nutrition, and yet we have completely different ways of coming into this. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Farm Bill, which currently the technical name is the Agriculture Improvement Act of 2018. If I have any former or current students on this call, don't groan. Everyone knows I talk about this too much or a lot, but we're just going to skim the surface of this. Dan, would you flip the slide, please? So if you're not familiar with the Farm Bill, you should get familiar because it affects every single person in this entire world every single day. It's an omnibus piece of legislation. Omnibus means there are a whole host of different topics that come together and get passed in one bill. There's a common thread that runs through them. part of our job and strategies to make sure there's a common thread running through something if we needed to get attached to a bill. And you can see that this isn't just about farmers, but if you care about nutrition, if you care about forestry, if you care about horticulture or organics or what do they call farmers markets, sorry. If you live or work with people in rural areas and you care about their internet access or clean sewer waste areas, the Farm Bill is for you. If you're more of an international person and you're interested in the food for peace provisions and a lot of our international trade, that's Title III. So it really covers so many aspects of all of our lives. Would you flip the slide, please, Dan? But what we're going to talk about and what works with our program today is talking about Title IV, which is nutrition. SNAP isn't the only program in there. In fact, the Food for Medicine Gus Schumacher program is in the Farm Bill as well. WIC is not. Even though a lot of people do believe WIC is part of the Farm Bill, it's not. And that's why we'd have to do separate advocacy, and it is important to make those calls. When you ask them to fully fund WIC, you can also ask them to pass the budget, which would be nice. But let's talk just a little bit about SNAP. And I'm not going to go into great detail about SNAP, but show you how advocacy looks, or at least the way I do advocacy looks when we're implementing something or thinking about Title IV and nutrition and making sure people have appropriate nutrition throughout. So flip that slide, please. So just to give you some basic, and I do not expect you to read this at all, but when we say that people can get SNAP benefits, that is not everybody. It is not a universal program where every single person on this call, if you're living in the United States, would be able to access this. It is really about people who don't have a lot of extra funds and in fact make a very little amount of money and have very few assets. And SNAP was never meant, although we can argue if this was appropriate or not, to provide a family with all of their food for an entire month. We think about SNAP on a month-to-month basis, but it was meant to kind of fill in gaps and provide some nutrition. Again, we can wonder if that's the appropriate way to do this, but just showing you how a family or an individual can become eligible for SNAP and what the government looks at, 3 different tests. We're not going to run through these, but just to show you how very low income people are in order to achieve SNAP benefits. If you remember people either getting more SNAP benefits or people who didn't originally get them, accessing them during COVID, that was part of President Trump and President Biden's way. It was one of the many ways to increase people's all over security during that time. But for the majority of people, the COVID SNAP expansion benefits have ended. I think there may be 1 or 2 programs that are ending soon. Don't quote me on this. So, all right, would you flip the screen, please? Okay, SNAP is an interesting program, and so it gives us actually a lot of a good fodder for talking. It is a fully funded federal program, which means your federal tax dollars pay for SNAP. But it is administered on the state level, which means the federal government creates some guidelines, and certainly USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, does do some work, but every state has the majority of the responsibility, also most of it underwritten by the federal government, to administer this program. And so we are in Missouri, and so I'm just going to give you some statistics about Missouri participants. So we do look at SNAP on a state-by-state basis, and states do, as we'll talk about in a minute, have the ability to make some changes to their SNAP programs that may not be the same in other states. So for example, Missouri borders Illinois. Illinois may have different SNAP eligibility, or Missouri may have different SNAP eligibility than the other, which could be beneficial for a family that is moving, or it could make it so that a family cannot move. I'm not sure, it's certainly not appropriate today, but I don't know that it's all bad that state by state we look at it differently. However, when we think about somebody not being able to go home and take care of a family member, or somebody going to a different state to access a better job, not being able then to access SNAP in the same way, we do have to kind of think how it hits our most vulnerable with this. Dan, would you flip the slide? Thanks. So because we administer SNAP on a state by state basis, we definitely do advocacy on many fronts. So what we're going to do just very briefly today is talk about this policy ecosystem and some of the ways that we are addressing the implementation or passing SNAP on the federal, on the state, and then on the community level. So that's what these three pictures are. So you'll see these as we go through. Okay, would you flip the slide? So we're going to talk about federal first. So go ahead, Dan. And the way that we think about this ecosystem in federal, and I put circles kind of around where a lot of, I'm not going to say my advocacy work because although I tried to get on a SNAP commission, I was not put on one. That's okay. I still follow it. We talk about it a lot. But thinking about effectively right now, we want to think about strategy and negotiation. We need to think about advocacy and lobbying and legislation and politics and economics, in part because, would you mind flipping the slide, Dan? When we talked about the Farm Bill originally, this is what I thought we would be talking about today. So the Farm Bill has, and I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but if you're not familiar with federal or even state budgeting, there are two kinds of funding methods. We have mandatory spending or mandatory funding and discretionary funding. And when we talk about the budget process, what's going on right now in Congress, that is about discretionary. It's annual, year-to-year amounts that we need to pass by, technically, without government shutdown, September 30th of every year for the next fiscal year. SNAP is what's called a mandatory program of the Farm Bill, which means it is, for the most part, it's kind of like teaching a foreign language. Here's the rule and here are all the exceptions, is what I feel like I'm saying to you. But for the most part, that funding structure is untouched for the 5 years in between when we need to reauthorize a federal program. SNAP takes up a giant chunk of the mandatory funding for this program. It does it because there are a lot of people who need a lot of nutrition. What you will see, or what you might have seen when we were discussing the Farm Bill, is that there are a lot of people saying we need to cut this area because it makes the Farm Bill very expensive. It doesn't mean we need to cut. In fact, I bet a lot of people on this call would think we would need to expand the funding for this. Anyway, I thought we'd be talking about this because we would have passed a new Farm Bill. Could you flip the screen, please, Dan? However, this Farm Bill, the one we were talking about, expired September 30th. And then would you flip it again? And Congress didn't pass a new one. Why didn't they pass a new one? Because Congress is and has been fairly dysfunctional on a lot of the major bills. This was one of the things that they needed to get done by September 30th, and they did not. Don't worry, SNAP is not expired. If you could flip it to the next one. In the budgetary stopgap bill that was passed in November, Congress did secure funding for SNAP at last year's levels through September 30th of 2024, when they hope to repass the Farm Bill. But again, since WIC is not in there, as Dan and some of the commenters in the chat mentioned, SNAP is set to expire on the 19th. And so if we don't get this stopgap bill, SNAP was only extended, I think, 2 months. So anyway, so what we need to do on the federal level, it's okay to keep that slide right now, is do a lot of advocacy to get the Farm Bill passed with a nice, big, healthy budget for SNAP. Okay, let's switch to Missouri. I'll do Missouri, and that's the Department of Social Services is the agency that administers SNAP on the state level. If you would turn it, Dan. And every state has numerous options in, like I said before, that they can make some choices. And Missouri has made some. One is that there is a work requirement that is a national work requirement. We're not going to talk about these today. What I do want to talk about is drug felony disqualification and telephone interviews, because that's where we're doing the majority of the advocacy in Missouri right now. So if you see in Missouri and in other states, there was a lawsuit in Florida where they tried to ban people permanently from receiving SNAP benefits if you've had a felony drug disqualification or conviction, even if you had served your sentence, survived probation, you were drug-free, it didn't matter. And the Supreme Court struck that down. So now states have what's called a modified ban. It's a little bit of work. They have to get very frequent drug testing, go through an application process. The other piece that we're doing, I'm going to explain both of what's going on in Missouri. In order to get SNAP, you fill out a form online or in paper, and then you have to have what DSS prefers as a telephone interview. Okay, so would you flip the slide? And so here's what we're doing in Missouri. We're certainly doing some lobbying, and I'm going to show you an example of that as well. But we're also doing, as you see at the bottom, impact litigation. That's where we're setting up court cases. It's going to be hard to move some of this through the legislature, and so we're trying to make some shifts through the judicial branch. We're doing that because the executive branch, even though there are many good people who work there, are understaffed and not getting good guidance in clearing up some of the problems we have. So we're looking to the judicial branch. Would you flip the slide, please? Okay, so this is a bill that was just pre-filed in Missouri. It is a bipartisan bill in the Senate where they are trying to lift fully the felony drug ban. It got some traction last year as well. This is Senator Lauren Arthur from around the Kansas City area, and Senator Coleman, who is a Republican. Senator Arthur is a Democrat, and they're coming together to try and get this film. So we'll see what we can do about moving this along, but we have a lot of lobbyists working on this. If you would flip the slide, please. And then this is really just one of the most horrific problems, which is you cannot get your telephone interview in Missouri. There is the federal government has come down really hard on DSS for Medicaid and for SNAP benefits, because the wait times on the phone can total 6 to 8 to 10 hours. There are frequent times where people are on hold for hours and hours and then for no good reason get disconnected. And it is absolutely horrific. If you think that you and I might not want to sit on the phone for 8 hours on hold, imagine someone who's trying to work 3 jobs and take public transportation in order to get these benefits. And it is virtually impossible to get this. DSS really pushes you to this phone interview. They don't want you coming to their office. And so this is really the only one of the main way we can get through this. So if you would flip the slide, you can see, oh, I'm sorry, go back. If you wouldn't mind, I did that wrong. Did we win that case? We discussed our most recent meeting. Amazing. Thank you for the update. I thought it was still going through. I assume it's appealed. Someone in the chat said, well, there is no reason for us to lose this case. It's ridiculous. But I know that working with the executive branch, even if they wanted to change things as they do, I mean, they've been in a lot of trouble with Medicaid implementation in Missouri, and they just can't seem to fix it. So my guess is that we will have to continue suing them to get this to move forward. And this is legal services. I can't say enough. And maybe the person who said it was from legal services. You all are killing it and doing great work in impact litigation in Missouri. Okay, if you would flip the screen, please, Dan. And now just because Dan talked a lot about this, but I don't want to leave out community partners. It's great to have SNAP in a state. We need to work with stores. We need to work with food pantries. We need to work with farmers markets so that we make sure, and the state of Missouri government, to ensure that not only do people have SNAP benefits, but they have good access in areas where people live or where public transportation easily goes, so they can access their SNAP benefits. So if you wouldn't mind turning the screen, Dan. Yeah, and so working a lot with coalition building, and Dan talked about that. The evaluation, the rulemaking and implementation is also important. And if you would flip the slide one more time. You're doing so good with this. And just talking about some of the food security coalitions, Empower Missouri, and I know Eric is on this call, has an amazing coalition making sure that we work to end hunger so that people can get food in the mouths and nurture their bodies. And so lots and lots of coalitions forming, and policy work is part that too, is ensuring that everyone can work together and we hear the voices. We always like to say you have an opportunity to be heard and a duty to listen to each other in order to make things come together so we can do policy change on that arena. And with that long-winded explanation, I will turn it back over to Dan to close and we can open it up for questions.
Amazing. No, thank you, Anna. And my pleasure to flip the slides anytime for you. I really admire and appreciate the work that you're doing. And I appreciate how you were talking about how complementary the approaches are and how well intersected, thanks to coalitions such as Empower Missouri. So Priya Fielding Singh, who wrote a recent book, How the Other Half Eats, and was the Brown School Social Policy Seminar special guest and speaker not too long ago, writes about the qualitative work that she did interviewing and even kind of cohabitating and living with a number of families experiencing food insecurity. And she says many of the families I met had either done so or were trying to figure out how to eat more nutritiously with the resources they had. Again, food insecurity being a lack of resources and an economic condition. But largely due to the structures implemented by the food industry and federal government, most felt like they were fighting an uphill battle and losing. So when we talk about a place for everyone, obviously we're talking about advancing issues for and especially with the individuals who are most impacted by policy change or the lack thereof in our food system. So to wrap us up, families should have the food and nutrition needed to live healthy lives, and there is a place for everyone in policy to help make this happen. Thank you so much for your time, your attention, and we want to give as much time that we have remaining left for folks for your questions and discussion.
Great, thank you, Dan and Anna. And it does look like there are a few questions in the chat, so I will go ahead and read some of those off. We do have a few minutes for that, so please continue to post your questions in the chat and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. But going back to talking about student-free and reduced price programs at schools, Markayla had a question about how that influences Title I schools and school designations.
Oh, great question. So largely CEP or community eligibility provision designation would be adjacent to a Title I eligibility or designation. So for folks who aren't as into the weeds on education policy, you're very welcomed. So it's a federal education program that supports students from lower income households throughout the United States and distributes funds to schools that are located in higher poverty areas. Typically, those funds are utilized for a number of different things, additional teaching supports, materials, technology, et cetera. And so CEP could be seen as like kind of like one way that schools that are sharing in similar designations are increasing their access to funding supports and supplements for the work that they're looking to do.
Thank you. And so another question about your study on CEP, did it look at impact on food insecurity rates? That was from Tamlin.
Ooh, another really great question. So directly, no. For better or worse, the data that's available through DESE doesn't measure individual student or even school level food insecurity experience. Other research has found connections between increased meal participation and decreased food insecurity or increased food security, not to do a double insecurity negative. But so when we kind of think about that relationship, I think it's safe to assume that if we see increased participation in school meals, we would see some interaction or impact on the experience of food security. Notably, again, that CEP alone we found wasn't necessarily enough to make significant impacts on meal participation. Schools really needed to be doing other innovative things, particularly around breakfast, to help to reduce barriers and increase access and participation.
Thank you. Another question from Markayla, how do farmer subsidies impact food insecurity in America?
Sure. Okay. So we don't have the current farm bill, but I know, and I've seen that a lot of times people make this a zero-sum game. If we're giving money for farm subsidies, we're taking money from food. If we're giving money to SNAP, we're taking money from farm subsidies. And I think that that's kind of like Dan was talking about framing. That's really an effective frame for getting people whipped up, but it actually bears little resemblance to the truth of the economics underlying the farm bill. Honestly, it's a really complicated process to talk about the different Title I food programs and the crop insurance in the space that we have here. But it's really, when you think bigger, when you're not on social media, and I'm not saying you are, but I hear it a lot on social media. When you're not on social media and you're not on listening to the Fox or and they're doing this false equivalency. Really, honestly, the economics are extremely separate. There are a lot of economic metrics they look at for crop subsidies and which crops get subsidized. What the tie that I will say that is important for us to think about, and that has to do with some really good lobbying on the sugar, corn, and although corn and corn syrup and wheat lobbyists, is that a lot of the foods that are approved for SNAP beneficiaries to purchase are also it contain especially the pre-made foods like frozen foods and things like that contain a lot of the products that are produced. I'm not using good farm words, but like corn into corn syrup. Sorry, it's been a long day. A lot of those foods contain corn syrup. Corn is one of our heavily subsidized commodities. That's a really important tie-in to see about where nutrition actually is. And I know some people talked about nutrition insecurity, which is really important. It is important to fill our children's bellies. It is also important for them to get nutrition, and foods that have a lot of processed foods in them are cheaper to buy and have more calories a lot of times. And so that's actually a really important connection. But in terms of the underlying economics, it's usually a false equivalency.
Thanks, Anna. A question from Madeline. Nice to see you, Madeline. For those in a more micro meso role or a not directly policy related career, how can we most effectively stay involved in the policymaking process, both in our personal lives and for the communities or individuals that we're working with?
Sure, I'll go first. Madeline, so nice to see you on your chat and your name. I hope you're doing well. It was great to have you in class. Listen, policy, we tend to say micro, meso, macro. You all bring the stories. You all bring the community stories and the individual stories into the lobbying and the testifying process, into the advocacy world. And you let people like me or let people like Dan know something's not working. And we need a more macro understanding of how to solve this problem. In your personal lives, I mean, go testify, write a letter to the editor, get involved with an organization like Empower Missouri that's doing really good work, or wherever you are in Chicago. We have a lot of alums, Madeline, in Chicago doing really good work in the policy realm. Feel free to look them up or reach out to me and we can connect to you. And they always need volunteers and need good people who care. But there is room for everyone in this policy realm.
Anything you want to add, Dan? That was a wonderful response. Thanks, Anna.
Yeah, I would just follow with, hey, Madeline, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining today.
Awesome. Wow, lots of good questions coming in. We probably won't have time to get to all of them, but I'll try to ask a couple more. How do you think food as medicine and the medicalization / insurance of food security and nutrition might impact where our food comes from? Have you heard of Medicaid being attached to prescription meals?
Yeah, that's a phenomenal question.
Have you?
No. Yeah. So I think a lot of the originating ideas of some folks working on food as medicine initiatives is to have better intersections between, again, robust healthcare system and food access. If we think about food being critical for both treatment of, but then also possibly prevention of different conditions. And so where our food comes from, like as there are kind of continued efforts. I know there's a big push in St. Louis for organizations that are operating and administering food as medicine programs, both kind of more recently and then for decades in terms of medically tailored meals, to utilize locally sourced food And so there is an opportunity there. Obviously, that has to be bolstered with more than just kind of a couple of anecdotal examples to help to bolster some local farming and local agricultural economies. And then in terms of I haven't heard of updates of it like happening. But I do know that there's speculation that that could be a direction to eventually head. That Medicaid, which is an incredibly robust federal healthcare insurance program, could potentially be utilized for covering things like medically tailored meals and food as medicine interventions. It's a great question.
That program is stunning. So I hope we'll all fight for that to work. Are there any other questions, Sarah?
There are, but being mindful of time, I am going to turn it over to Sarah Sims to close us out. For those of you who we did not get to, I have a feeling Dan and Anna would be very open to receiving your questions via email, or you can reach out to Brown Admissions if you're a prospective student wanting to learn more about how we do this work at the Brown School. And then I'll turn it to Sarah Sims to close us out for the day. Thank you both so much for this really, really great
Thank you for asking us.
Yeah, thanks again, Sarah, Dan, and Anna for a great presentation. Just a reminder that you can rewatch and share a recording of today's presentation visiting our website. I dropped a link in the chat. Or using the QR code that's on your screen right now. Today's presentation should be posted either tomorrow or the next day. And then I would just invite everyone to check out our next program. We have 3 more programs this month that fall under that curriculum showcase series. So it's a different topic. The program next Tuesday, January 16th, is going to look at substance use orders from a public health perspective. But again, it's going to kind of be in the same format where you're looking at what the Brown School and our Brown School faculty are doing and teaching about here, and kind of like a sample class. Finally, I also would love to invite everybody to check out in February our Black History Month programming. We have 5 programs coming up in February, and you can see those on that same website as well. So again, thank you everybody for joining today, and we will now sign off. Have a great rest of your day.